Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Friends, before going into the details of the war, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification bell. Please support by subscribing and turning on the notification bell. We are a strong community. We must not give up on Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is reaching another critical moment. Russia's terroristic missile and drone attacks on Ukraine's civil infrastructure show no sign of letting up, despite Putin's suggestion last week that the strikes would stop. According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, speaking earlier this week, 30% of Ukraine's power stations were destroyed in the space of just 8 days. The grim intent of this attack on Ukraine's energy supply network is clear. As winter approaches, Putin is trying to freeze soldiers and ordinary civilians alike into submission. We should be very clear. The barbaric strikes on Ukrainian energy systems are potentially some of the most catastrophic attacks so far in the war. Yet Ukraine remains unbowed. As the history of strategic bombing of civilians suggests, Putin is unlikely to gain any military advantage. Ukrainians, united in resistance to Russia, are reacting to the bombings with anger, not sadness or war weariness. They continue to resist with all available means, demonstrating the spirit of collective defiance that has defined their resistance so far. Indeed, so many ordinary citizens have been trying to shoot down the drones with standard rifles that the government has had to advise them to leave air defense to the military. Sadly, it seems that Ukraine's defiance no longer inspires the West as it did in the early stages of the war. In fact, Putin's decision to escalate the war seems almost calculated to coincide with a moment when Western leaders have taken their eye off the ball. The UK, perhaps Ukraine's most important international ally, has entered a period of zombie government as the technocrats take over. Boris Johnson's instinctual, unreserved support for Ukraine, born surely of the same instinct for national sovereignty that allowed him to grasp the appeal of Brexit, is gone. In its place is a government that may support Ukraine in principle, but now lacks the bandwidth to keep making the case for it. The US has lost focus, too. Joe Biden has chosen this moment to pick a fight with China, restricting exports of important computer chips. Biden has always viewed Ukraine as, at best, a distraction from the bigger aim of isolating China. When Russia's invasion began to be beaten back on the battlefields of Ukraine, Biden seemed to come to the view that the US can now concentrate its energies elsewhere in the EU. The mood is truly dark. In a remarkable speech last week, EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell gave vent to the pessimism and anguish that now grips Europe's elites. We Europeans, he said, are facing a situation in which we suffer the consequences of a process that has been lasting for years, in which we have decoupled the sources of our prosperity from the sources of our security. It was an honest, if hopeless, assessment of the EU's current malaise, but the war is not about to go away. Quite the opposite. As Ukraine's battlefield advantage of recent weeks ebbs away in the coming winter mud and snow, Russia may well gain the upper hand. Headlines of liberated towns and cities are likely to be replaced by frequent reports of Russian strikes and Ukrainian hardship. At such a time, Western politicians may struggle to muster popular support for Ukraine, especially when the economic costs of this support become more obvious. One thing remains certain: Ukraine has the courage to see this through, however brutal Putin's attempt to terrorize the people into submission becomes. If the West is to stay the distance, however, Western politicians will have to show much more courage and much more vision than they are currently doing. Today's world leaders have not yet managed to articulate what is really at stake in the conflict. Ukraine is fighting not only for its own national survival, but also for the universal principle of national sovereignty. In a world where many regional powers are looking to redraw the map, this is a principle that needs defending. Millions of ordinary Ukrainians recognize what is at stake, and are prepared to fight for it. It's time the rest of us woke up to this, too. Jacob Reynolds is partnerships manager at the Academy of Ideas. Russian missile strikes apartment building in Ukrainian port city Mykolaiv in one of 3 explosions that were heard in Mykolaiv in the morning of Tuesday, the 18th of October, a witness said that a Russian missile hit an apartment building in the Ukrainian port city of Mykolaiv. One wing of the downtown building was completely destroyed by the missile, leaving behind a large crater. Witnesses said that a fire crew pulled the body of a man out of the rubble. When the missile struck, the building's residents had been hiding in its basement. One resident claimed that the victim was found in the basement of the wing which collapsed after the missile struck. The missile was identified by a municipal official as an S-300. Officials said that a drone attack took place at the Every Marine Terminal, Mykolaiv, on Sunday night. It damaged sunflower storage tanks and set ablaze oil. Why did Russia invade Ukraine and what could happen next? Russia's special military operation has been raging for almost 8 months as the conflict records devastating casualties as well as the displacement of millions of Ukrainians. President Vladimir Putin began the conflict by claiming Ukraine needed to be demilitarized and denazified. Ukraine has defied odds throughout the conflict and defended against Russian attacks with the help of Western military aid. In recent weeks, President Volodymyr Zelensky's forces launched a major counter-offensive to retrieve the besieged city of Kharkiv, but as Ukraine's resistance grows, Mr. Putin's threats of escalating the conflict grow, also causing concern globally of whether nuclear warfare will be unleashed. Mr. Zelensky said Russian officials had begun to prepare their society for the possible use of nuclear weapons, but added he does not believe Russia is ready to use them. President Zelensky said action was needed now, as Russia's threats were at risk for the whole planet. Moscow, he claimed, had made a step already by occupying the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Europe's largest nuclear station, which President Putin is trying to turn into Russian property. In response to the growing sense that his invasion was backfiring, Mr. Putin staged a televised address in which he ordered a partial military mobilization of 300,000 reservists and threatened to use nuclear weapons against the West, a major escalation of his rhetoric in which he assured the world, "It's not a bluff." Russia's faltering troops have employed brutal siege warfare tactics throughout the war, surrounding Ukraine's cities and subjecting them to intense shelling campaigns, a strategy previously seen in Chechnya and Syria. Ukrainian cities in the east and south have been battered by Russian missiles in pursuit of gradual territorial gains, while the targeting of residential buildings, hospitals and nurseries have led to outraged accusations of civilians being intentionally targeted and of war crimes being committed. Mr. Zelensky's initial appeals for NATO to implement a no-fly zone remain unanswered, as the West fears such an act would be interpreted as a provocation by Russia and draw the alliance into a much larger war over Eastern Europe. However, US President Joe Biden, UK Prime Minister Liz Truss, their European counterparts and UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres have all condemned Moscow's unprovoked and unjustified attack and promised to hold it accountable, with the West introducing several rounds of tough economic sanctions against Russian banks, businesses and oligarchs, while supplying Ukraine with additional weapons, hardware and defense funding. That said, the Allies have also faced criticism for not doing enough to support the millions of refugees from the conflict, who have fled their homeland for neighboring states like Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania and Moldova. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video.